This week we're looking at a Japanese whiskey that is supposed to be rich and smoky. I'm Matt, I'm the whiskey nerd, and like I said, this week we're looking at a rich, smoky Japanese whiskey, the Yoichi single malt from the Nikka Distillery. So let me get it into the glass and I'll tell you a bit more about it, and I'll tell you why I've got such a small little bottle. So recently enough, I was in Japan and I bought myself a lot of whiskey. I wanted to try as much whiskey as possible, but I was limited by luggage capacity, so I bought lots of these little packs where there's kind of 3 packs of different whiskeys. I bought a couple of these because I really wanted to get to know Japanese whiskeys, but I also bought kind of small 200ml bottles, and I've been reviewing those whiskeys. If you want to see a review of lots of Japanese whiskeys, I've got plenty which you can check afterwards, but this is all about this whiskey right here, the Yoichi single malt. And when I said this is meant to be a smoky style of whiskey, that's what this is really meant to be. The founder of Nikka Whisky, Nikka Taketsuru, he studied how to make whiskey in Scotland. So he actually wanted to make whiskey the Scottish style. And when it came time for him to found his first whiskey distillery, he founded it all the way up in Hokkaido, in the very top of Japan, in the city of Sapporo, just outside the city of Sapporo, because that's actually very, very cold for half the year, and it's only a little bit cold for the other half of the year. So it's kind of similar enough climates to Scotland, where it never really gets super, super hot. And he wanted to make whiskey the Scottish style, so he wanted to make it kind of smoky. So in the kind of Nikka family of distilleries, they've got 2 distilleries. They've got the Yoichi Distillery up north, and they've got the Miyagikyo Distillery down south. And that Miyagikyo one, I'll put a link down below, I'll put a link up there. I reviewed the Miyagikyo single malt, very, very nice whiskey, but that one's much lighter, much softer, much sweeter. This one here, it's meant to be like a deeper, heavier Scottish whiskey. And what they do when they make their whiskeys is they kind of blend these 2 styles together to come up with something a little bit kind of more balanced for the Japanese palate, which is a little bit kind of favors softer, sweeter whiskeys. But this here is all Yoichi whiskey. So it is quite strong, quite heavy. It is a non-age statement whiskey, so it is probably around 3 years old, maybe 4 years old, and it comes in at 45% alcohol by volume. They don't have any real information about the casks, just that it was aged in bourbon casks and finished in sherry. So it's going to be kind of a classic enough profile, with that bourbon cask giving you vanilla sweetness and the sherry cask giving a bit of fruitiness and a bit of lightness to the whiskey. And I think that's kind of all there is to say about it. It is kind of the flagship whiskey from the Yoichi Distillery. I did buy this at the Miyagikyo Distillery down south, so I got it for quite cheap. Japanese whiskey these days has gotten really, really expensive. I'll talk about that a bit later, but right now let's just go in for the nose on the Yoichi single malt whiskey, or as we would say in Japan, kanpai, but I'd say in here in Ireland, sláinte. It is really, really rich, so it is actually a lot smokier than I was expecting for a Japanese whiskey, but because I knew that this is supposed to be their smoky whiskey, I was kind of expecting it. It is almost like a maritime, almost salty herbal peat. Like, it's not a real like peat bomb. It's not like a big smoky hit of like peat whacking you around the face. It is just quite peaty, quite herbal, with that kind of almost like a maritime, salty, that little bit of peat, because the distillery is up by the ocean, so it does get a lot of that sea air influence into the casks. But despite that, it is quite fruity. Like, there's a lot of red apple here. There's a lot of in the Miyagikyo Distillery I was getting like red berries. Here it's really more like red apple, pear, orchard fruits, those kind of notes coming here on the nose. There's a little bit of like citrus, almost like a lemon, not like an orange citrus, more like a lemon citrus, where it's a little bit brighter, a little bit fresher, but I'm really just getting that kind of herbal, salty, maritime peat with that apple note coming through. Not really getting a huge amount of vanilla, but I'm just getting this kind of base level, like almost brown sugar, kind of sweetness, caramel, butterscotch, toffee, that kind of note coming through underneath those bright orchard fruits. So I'm going to go in for the palate and see how that is. Cheers. If the nose was a little bit subtle, the palate, anything but subtle. It hits your mouth and you get this big, bright, oh, that's quite sweet, that's quite friendly, that's quite apples and pears. And then as it spreads out, you go, oh, that's peaty. That is definitely a peated whiskey. It's again, it got this like maritime, almost like salty note on my tongue here, but that's more into the finish. On that palate, I got this big hit of, again, herbal, botanical peat, where you get those like the almost floral herbal notes of the peat rather than that big heavy hit of like smoke coming through. Still quite apples and pears, still quite like that butterscotch toffee, almost like the apples have been stewed, like, you know, for an apple pie filling, that kind of note. Whereas I wouldn't say many baking spices, maybe a touch of ginger spice, but just, yeah, that kind of nice rounded apples and pears note. Not really getting a huge amount of sherry influence, so I'm going to go in again for another sip, see if I can find some sherry. Cheers. Yeah, not really getting a huge amount of sherry. Like, I've got the apple notes, I've got a little bit, like I said, that kind of lemony citrus note here on the palate, and that's just being a nice counterpoint to the like this maritime salty peat smoke with that base layer of caramel and toffee. Not a huge amount of sherry, just like a nice, like, again, kind of like the nose into the palate, the same kind of journey coming through there. So I'm going to go in again, this time focus on the finish. Cheers. Okay, so again, up front, big hit, very light mouthfeel, not really thick or heavy, and that kind of, it contributes to the fall off in the finish. Like, definitely got that maritime salty note. As I'm breathing here, the apples and pears have gone maybe a little bit into like a melon kind of note, where it's definitely lighter, maybe a bit juicier, a bit waterier, not as like sharp as like a red apple, but just quite light on the finish. Like, I've got a little bit of like oak spice, a little bit of oak tannins lingering on, but like a lot of Japanese whiskies, despite coming in at 45%, the finish does fall off pretty quickly. Again, it's not an unpleasant finish, it's just a quick enough fall off on the finish. Before I give my final thoughts on this whiskey, if you're new here, scroll down, hit that thumbs up button, hit that subscribe button. I put out whiskey reviews like this and like the reviews of those other Nikka whiskies every Wednesday, and I put out cocktail recipes featuring whiskey every Friday. So if you want to see those, make sure you hit that subscribe button. And while you're down there, leave me a comment, let me know if there's any whiskies you think I should review in the future. But now, my final thoughts on this. It's grand. It's a little bit, I think, non-committal. That's, I think, what the big problem with this is, because I'm getting, a nice hit of peat, and then it doesn't really go into a peat bomb. I'm like, quite a nice bit of fruity notes here, apples, pears, but then I don't get that big hit of like sherry. I'm getting, a nice bit of vanilla, butterscotch, toffee, caramel, but I'm not getting that really rich, thick, kind of creamy note. So it is somewhere in the middle. I mean, if you didn't like smoky peated whiskies, you might enjoy this. You might say, I want to try out some peated whiskies, but I don't want to go for a big, heavy Scottish whiskey. You might try a Japanese whiskey and get your entrance into peat. You get dip your toes into peat without getting that big kind of hit of flavor. But me, I wish they had committed a little bit more to the other notes, like the Miyagikyo whiskey, that one here. It was nice, it was light, but it was fruity, it was bright. It kind of gave me the flavor of what the Miyagikyo Distillery was going for. Something light, bright, rounded, rich, malty. This here is supposed to be kind of deeper, richer, smoky whiskey. I'm not really getting a huge amount of depth. Like, it isn't a bad whiskey, but at the price I've seen it charged for outside of Japan, like it's 100, 110, 120 euro, way too expensive. A full-size bottle of this in the distillery in Japan, I think, was like between 35, 40 euro when you factor in the exchange rate. It wasn't that bad. It was like a third of the price. So I think that might be fine, but outside Japan, I wouldn't be going for the kind of core, single, basic entry level on the Yoichi. I think I'd go in for something a little bit richer, a little bit more full flavored if you had to make a choice. But that's just my thoughts. If you've ever tried the Yoichi single malt, let me know in the comments. And well, I've got it in my glass, so I might as well keep enjoying it. And I'll see you next time. Sláinte.